with permission from the parties and changing some of the information so that it's not easily identifiable, we're going to talk about a recent mediation that we were able to assist two parties with, came to a successful conclusion, to give you an idea of how a mediation might go. In this case, there were two parties who were business partners in a small restaurant, and this happened to be in the state of Nevada. And these two partners had been friends for some time, and they opened a restaurant in a small storefront. And the restaurant was a very niche business. It sold one type of food, and it was an over-the-counter type of restaurant. No sit down. You walked in and ordered your food, and you left it with it. They had a couple tables outside that you could sit at, but it wasn't a sit-down service waitstaff type restaurant. And these two partners rented the space. They had this idea. One of them handled the front with the ordering. The other one was more involved with the food preparation. And after a year or two, a little more than 2 years, they had been pretty successful. But there were some differences of opinion on how to go forward. One of the parties wanted to hire some staff because they were both working a lot of hours. They both had to be there all the time, basically, while they're open. And it was wearing out the person who was on the front staff, the front line on the counter, where they couldn't work that many hours. Family obligations came up. Lifestyle obligations came up. So they were thinking, well, let's hire somebody to help run the counter, take the orders. And the other partner said, no, I don't want to do that because that's going to cost us money. And we're partners in this. I'm going to work full time. I'm not hiring somebody to take over my duties. Why should you get to hire somebody to take over your duties? So as the conversation escalated, the two parties got to the point where they started to feel like they couldn't work together anymore. And one or both of them had to leave this business. They couldn't keep working together. But there was a problem in that the lease on the building was only in the name of one of the parties, and the other party is the one that wanted to stay. So they were having trouble figuring out how to dissolve the business. The one that wanted to leave didn't want to leave empty-handed because they had their name on the lease. They were responsible. And they also felt like the business had been built up to be worth something. So if they left empty-handed, they were on the hook for the lease, and they had no money to walk away after they had put in their effort in building the business. But the other party said, well, you're the one who wants to leave. Why should I give you money? And it escalated to the point where they were about ready to go to court, to file a court case. Fortunately, one of the attorneys that were talking to these parties said, before you do all this, you should maybe look at mediation, because look, between the two of you, you cannot resolve this. You both have very stubbornly attached ideas about what is right and wrong. Neither one of you is incorrect necessarily, but just different points of view. So why don't you get a third party to get involved to maybe point out what the possibilities are? So we got involved and we talked to both of the parties. The party that wanted to leave, their case, their point of view was that, look, I spent 2 years building this business. My name's on the lease. I don't really want to leave, but the other person wants to run the business different than me. They want to hire more staff. They want to add more expenses, which means my income is going to go down because as a partner, if we make less profit because we have additional employees, I get paid less. I'm still doing the same job. The other partner that was running the front counter said, well, I want to stay here. I'm not wanting to leave. I just need a little time off. I need to hire somebody. Our business has grown. It's not my problem, right? But I don't want to give you any money because you're the one that's leaving. What about the lease? Well, it wasn't, we put the lease in your name because you're the one who leased it. The landlord wasn't willing to switch the lease to the other name. So we looked at the case, we looked at the feelings of the parties, and we saw there was some common ground. They both wanted the same thing. They both wanted the business to continue. The person on the counter didn't necessarily, they didn't want to be away from the business. They liked it. They wanted to stay there. They were willing to even hire another chef if their partner left. The person who was the chef cooking in the back, they liked the job, but they didn't want to do it for less money. So after hearing them both out, what we suggested was, look, if this goes to court, what's going to happen is that the legal fees, the court fees, would probably end up being more than the business is worth, right? This is a small company. They might have had revenues of $100,000, $150,000 a year, not making a ton of money. You might spend $50,000 on legal fees to get this done. On the other hand, there's some realities involved, and that's one thing that, as a mediation facilitator, that we do is we talk about realities. We try to have empathy and be kind and considerate, but we also point out the realities that might not be so comfortable, that might be harsh. Look, if the party that has the lease on the business walks away from the business, even if they got paid money, they're still on the hook for the lease. If the other party fails at the business and it goes under, the landlord for that business is going to come back after that party that left and say, where's my money? Doesn't matter if they left the business. They don't care about that. They lease the business to them, or the building to them. So that's a factor to keep in mind. The other part is the person who wants to stay, and now they want to hire a chef and they want to hire somebody on the counter. Look, if you do that, now in addition to your job of running the counter, you have to manage 2 employees. Right now you're managing 0 employees because the chef is basically a partner, so they don't need management. They're a manager themselves. They manage their own affairs because they're a partner in the business. There's no other employee in the business. There's nobody on the counter. There's no wait staff that you have to manage. So now you go from managing 0 people to managing 2 people. I have to tell you, managing 2 people is a full-time job by itself. You may not have any extra time to run the counter at all, because by the time you're doing payroll, HR, scheduling, motivating people, making sure they're doing the right thing, hiring, retaining, you might have a full-time job all by yourself managing 2 people. In fact, you might not have any left time over to do anything else. It seems easier than it is. You might just think, well, I hire somebody, I'm paying them, they're going to do their job. Well, there's a big turnover in employment right now. It's called the Great Resignation. You might not be able to find a good person. You might not even realize how great of an employee you have with that chef as it is, because they're doing a good job. You hire another chef, who knows if they're going to be any good. That chef you hire, they left some other job for some reason. Maybe it was them, maybe it was the other job, but either way, they're already failed at a job. And even if they left that job because it was a bad job, they might think that your job is bad too. Who knows the reason why people don't like their job? It might have been a perfectly great place to work, but just didn't match them. So if you have a chef that you've hired that's not a business partner, that all of a sudden one day decides, man, I don't feel like coming in, or I don't like working here, and they leave, now what are you going to do? Now your business is shut down, and until you hire another chef, you're out of business. That might be worth more than even what you pay for rent. So by looking at the reality of what the risks are, not just what their problems are, both parties started to see, look, if I'm the chef and I walk away, I'm on the hook for this lease. The front counter person, she said, look, if I break up this business and hire another chef and hire a counter person, I'm at risk of having to pay the bills without having income, right? If my chef quits, if I can't find a good chef, now I still have to pay the rent, the utilities, all the other things that go into a business expense, and I don't have any income. So both of them started to see the downside and the consequences for doing this. Really, the problem stemmed from one thing and one thing only. The counter person wanted a better schedule, and the chef didn't want to have less income. Actually, she wanted more income. So how do you solve that problem? Well, the counter person really wanted to work part-time. Instead of working 8 a.m. until 6 p.m., she wanted to work really like 9 to 1 or 9 to 5, like a regular job. And the chef really wanted more money. In reality, what came out from the conversation is she thought she was doing more work, or she was cooking all the time and doing more work. And the counter person, it's a little bit less of an intense job, at least in her thought process. So what we suggested was for the chef to pop into the front counter for 15-20 minutes at a time, just to see what that front counter work was like, so that her perspective on it's an easy job, you're just at the counter, you don't have to cook food, was made more real. She could see that it's hard. And for the counter person to realize that if she had less hours and no consequence for pay, it wasn't really fair for the other person, and she realized that. What we suggested, it's not binding, they didn't have to do this, was don't try to let one person leave the business. Because the business, you might as well just close it. If the chef leaves and you hire an outside chef, the business is going to fail at some point. So you might as well just close it now. And neither one of them really wanted to do that. The chef really didn't want to leave. She was going to go take a chef job somewhere else. So it's not like she didn't want to cook food anymore. Which was a shame, because this restaurant was going to have to hire a chef, and this chef was going to go have to get a job. So why not just keep it together? So what we suggested was for the business to hire a part-time person that would work in the afternoon, not in the morning, because when the counter person got there at 8 in the morning to help get the place started up, to open up the office, open up the counter, help the chef get started with the food prep. If you hire somebody else that you're expecting to show up early in the day, what if they don't show up? What if they come in late? You're not there to start that process. If you are the counter person, front of the house, and you're there when the other person shows up after lunch, maybe your other person shows up at noon and helps you through the lunch rush at the counter. And then once the dust settles after lunch, maybe 2 or 2:30, then you leave. And leave the other person there with your chef. Knowing full well there's going to be some days that your new staff doesn't show up at 2 o'clock and you're going to have to work until 6. Too bad. Your company. There may be some days when they show up but they're not doing a good job, or you're too busy and you have to stay later. That's part of being a business owner. At the same time, that expense, if it's only helping one person, isn't fair that it burdens the chef, because the chef doesn't have a part-time person helping make their job easier, so why do they have to pay for it? On the other hand, we told the chef, look, it is good for your business because you might be able to sell more. You might be able to get more orders because people aren't going to walk out because they have to wait, or because the dining room or the entry area is clean. So it is helping you some, so maybe it should cost you a little. The expense for this extra person, we had calculated, was going to be about 4 hours a day, from 2 to 6, times 6 days a week, 24 hours. We recommended paying a higher than average wage, $30 an hour, times 24 hours. It ended up being about $150 a week by the time you had payroll taxes. We recommended that the owners share that expense 2/3, meaning that the front staff person, the counter person, pays 100 of it, and the chef pays 50 of it. So that way it wouldn't be a big burden on the chef, knowing full well that they would benefit a little bit, because now when that extra person's there during a lunch rush, maybe the front counter person can pop in the back and help do some prep. Maybe they can take some of the burden off the orders. Either way, we told them both, this is going to have a negative effect. It's going to have a negative effect on your money, because it's going to cost you in the front $100. It's going to cost you in the back $50 a week. But if you look at that as an investment in your business to where now maybe you can build up. Maybe the phone rings to place an to-go order. Maybe you can catch more phone calls. Maybe you can take more orders. Maybe you're missing $100 a day in orders anyways because you don't have enough staff to answer the phone in 2 or 3 rings, or it just rings out and people just hang up and call somewhere else, right? Maybe somebody walks in and they see a line and they leave. You might be able to make up that $150 in one day's extra sales. You don't know. You won't know until you try. As long as you can afford that $100 a week off your salary or $50 a week off your salary, you can try it out for a couple months, see how it works. And it keeps you both cooperating with one another. And it also keeps you out of the danger, the alligator of what could happen if one of you leaves or if you have controversy in your business. That's our suggestion. And what we said is before you make a decision on that suggestion, think about it for a few days. Go back to work. Imagine this happening. Imagine that extra person being there. You as a chef, even though it's not your idea, imagine what it would be like to have an extra person that you could maybe pass the orders to while your counterperson, your other partner, is taking an order at the register. Maybe if there's another person there you can pass orders to, it won't sit on your warming tray for 5 minutes while the customer's waiting. The food might be not getting mushy while you're waiting. How much would that help you? Imagine that extra person there, how much is going to help both of you. And for 3 or 4 days, go back to work and do that and envision, fantasize about that happening. And then both of you come back and talk to us again. And we had a mutual conversation with the 2 partners and our mediator to get another sense of feedback. There was a lot more common ground. There was still a couple little details to work out, like, well, I don't know if 12 to 6 is the best hours. I still want to come in late. And our suggestion was, look, if you as business owners are not both the first 2 people there in the morning, one of you is going to have resentment. If you as the chef are there at 8 o'clock to open up and your partner's not there, you're going to be grumbling the whole time until they show up at noon or whatever their hours are. And that's not going to be good for you. And if you as the counterperson gets to sleep in every morning or do whatever you do in the morning and your other partner's there grinding it out, that's not going to be good for you either, because you're not going to have a good working relationship. You both should be there to start out, get the ball rolling, and then maybe you leave a little later, but it's going to cost you. It's a convenience for you. Both parties understood there was a compromise that needed to happen. They ended up pursuing that. We also told them to maybe start with a temp person. Start with somebody on a temporary basis for a couple months to see how that worked out. Maybe not do it every day. Maybe do it your busiest days, 3 days a week. Maybe Thursday, Friday, Saturday. They were closed on Sunday and Monday. Maybe you do it every other day. Try that out. Maybe try different hours. Instead of 12 to 6, maybe try 11 to 5. Right? Maybe you don't need them at the end of the day. Maybe you need them in the middle of the day. Maybe the counterperson can pop out for a few hours and then come back at the end of the day. Who knows? But try it out a few different ways to see what happens. This was about a month and a half ago. We checked in with the clients this week. They both reported that there were a lot of good things that came from it. They were still working out the kinks. They were still getting used to having less money. It did seem like they were getting some more business, but their net profit wasn't any higher, but a lot of it had to do with food costs. Even though they were selling more, their monthly or their weekly business was up several $100s in sales, which you would think would be able to pay for this extra employee. But since inflation had raised up their food costs for the raw materials they were buying from their food supplier, they weren't making a lot more net profit. That has nothing to do with their solution to their mediation. That had to do with the inflation marketplace. And we had some suggestions for that too. But it seemed like it was a good result. Now, sometimes you don't know how good of a result is, because if you avoided a big catastrophe, sometimes that's not apparent. If things seem the same and they didn't get better, that might be a good result if you avoided a big crisis. So we keep reminding them, look, you might have avoided a big crisis by one of you storming out and leaving, and maybe the chef would have went to another job and hated their job. Maybe the counterperson would have kept the kept the business going, but then it would have failed because they didn't have a good chef. Maybe you avoided the big conflict that you didn't realize. So that's one example of a mediation. Keep an eye on our channel. We'll do these with permission from the clients. Again, we don't give names, we don't give details, and we always get permission. But it can show you how a mediation can help any kind of conflict between parties in a way that is mutually beneficial and avoid big problems later.